Hsitorical Jesus in wartime. This is part 3 of the Hsitorical Jesus. In this section of this video, we the Ennead 9 Piso 9 orbs will focus on Cleopatra's son because this is very important to show you all how the missing years of so-called Jesus wasn't missing at all. This is Ptolemy the 15th Caesar, birth June 23rd, 47 BC in Egypt. So-called death August the 30th at 1730 BC, age 17. Buried or lost at sea, specifically buried in Cleopatra's tomb. Memorial ID 2376538. The real Jesus is history knows and religion denies. Firstly, let's look at the list of names he had and their Christian counterpart. Ptolemy the 15th Caesar. Jesus spoke about Caesar in Matthew 22:15-22. Then went the Pharisees and took counsel how they might entangle him in his talk. And they sent out unto him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Master, we know that thou art true and teachest the way of God in truth. Neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of men. Tell us therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why tempt ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny and said unto him, Whose this image and subscription? They say unto him, Caesar's. Then said he unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. When they heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way. Another name of Caesarion was Theos Philometer, meaning the father-loving, mother-loving God. Jesus called God Father. John 14:10. Believest thou not that I am in the Father and the Father in me? The words that I speak unto you, I speak not of myself, but the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. Jesus loved his mother. John 19:26. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciples standing by, whom he loved, he said unto his mother, Woman, behold our son. His other Egyptian name, Awpanet-Jeter Rentinecum Sitipinta Erdematerna Sekur Monk Amun, meaning son of the avenging God. Jesus was called son of the living God, Matthew 16:16. And Simon Peter answered and said, Thou art Christ, the Son of the living God. Chosen by Ptah, an Egyptian creator god. Jesus chose 12 disciples for God. John 15:16. Ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you and ordained you that ye should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit should remain, that whosoever ye should ask of the Father in my name, he may give it to you. Another title he had was Dispenser of the Justice of Ra. Jesus said God would bring about justice. Luke 18:7. New International Version. And would not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? Another title he had was the living power of Amun. Amun means hidden. Jesus taught about hidden things. Matthew 13:44. The parables of the hidden treasure and the pearl. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again and then laid it. Then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. Caesar was called King of Kings by Cleopatra, his mother. Caesarion, the king of Egypt. After Cleopatra had begun her liaison with Mark Antony, the Roman triumvir of the East, Caesarion appeared at Alexandria in 34 with the title King of the Kings, while his mother called herself Queen of Kings. Following Antony's disastrous defeat in Actium in 31 during the war against his fellow triumvir Octavian, Cleopatra sent Caesarion to Bernice, a seaport on the Red Sea coast of Upper Egypt, but Octavian lured him back to Alexandria where the young king was executed. Jesus is called King of Kings in Revelation 17:12. There shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And this was also said to have been put on the cross. This is the King of the Jews, Luke 23:26 through 38. However, this will be spoken about later to where Hsitorical Jesus was really killed at. However, this quote, Revelation 17:14, the King of Kings quote, is speaking of Nupu's present inside of the sun, who actually has woolly hair, discovered by scientists in the 1800s. Henry Alexandre Delisandris and George Ellery Hale. These two scientists used a machine called a spectroheliograph to see the sun in woolly hair called flocculi in the 1890s. This machine revealed the prominence from the sun from 1892 to 1908 that showed these flocculi and high levels of activity. Prominences are glowing red loop material shooting out from the sun. This is the machine that they use. These are the woolly flocculi loops that's jumping off from the sun. When you look up the etymology of flocculi, it means tuft of wool, as in hair. Definition of flocculus in Merriam-Webster: a tuft of woolly hairs on a plant, specifically a mass of hyphal filaments or portion of mycelium of a fungus. New Latin from Latin, one of the small masses of tufts making up certain cloud formations that African people have also falling into this category. Mundane scientists also say the sun has what they call solar filaments, which are also defined as threads of hair or pilus, hair appendage. Filaments can be found in wool, animals, plants, protein, to name a few. The sun has ropes of plasma defined as solar rope flux or flocculi, wool in parentheses. More Kemetic Egyptian names of Hsitorical, falsely called Jesus. All right. Awam Penetjetur Inti Neham, meaning heir of the God who saves. Matthew 1:21. Jesus, she will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. The Hebrew word for he will save is Yoshia, which has the same Hebrew root Yud Shin Ayin as the name Yeshua, Yud Shin Vav Ayin. Thus, the Messiah's name is explained on the basis of what he will do. Etymologically, the name Yeshua is a contraction of the Hebrew name Yehashua, English Joshua, which means Yahweh saves. It is also the masculine form of the Hebrew word Yeshua, which means salvation. Matin Ray, meaning carrying out the rule of Ra, or son of righteousness. Jesus believed to be the son of righteousness as well to some Christians' interpretation, Malachi 4:2. Son of righteousness can also be translated son of vindication. The context concerns the day of the Lord, the time when God vindicates his people and judges sin. This vindication will be clear to all, like the bright light of the sunrise. The one described as the Son of Righteousness can be no other than Jesus Christ himself. The Lord is called the Lord, your righteousness, in Jeremiah 23:6, and the coming of the Messiah is pictured as a sunrise in several passages. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. Isaiah 61. See also 2 Samuel 23:4, Habakkuk 3:4, and Luke 1:78 through 79. Second Monk Unk Amun, living image of Amun. Jesus was called something similar. Colossians 1:15, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. Let's move on. Most of the world has been told that there is no record of Jesus' life after his birth. then at 12, and then at 30 years old. Luke 2:41-52. The boy Jesus at the temple. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover when he was 12 years old. They went up to the festival according to the custom. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled for a day, then began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple court, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Luke 3:23. Now Jesus himself was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. Listen to sound right reason. Now that you all can see that Caesarion and Jesus are the same person, let's now look at what history says about Caesarion. Conclusion. The above calculation may appear complicated, but in a nutshell, these arguments run like this. The historical information. These are the times of where they think Jesus died. Beginning of Tiberius' reign, AD 14, 15 year of Tiberius' reign, beginning of John the Baptist's ministry, AD 28, a few months later, beginning of Jesus' ministry, AD 29, minimum 3-year duration of Jesus' ministry, most likely date of Jesus' crucifixion, AD 33. Now let's look at what Noon Science says, then move forward into Caesarion's background. Although Jesus was predestined from birth to become an incarnation, he did things that other ordinary people did until he was 30 years old. And this is one reason that the full life of Jesus before he is 30 is not given. According to the Bible, Jesus' incarnation took place when he was 30 years old. St. Matthew 3rd chapter 16 verse, and this is when he became God. And incarnation does not take place in the womb. It must take place after the person is born and becomes mature. The beginning of the book of St. John is the truest of the beginning of the 4 Gospels, because it begins by speaking of the Spirit God that incarnates itself into the man, instead of speaking of a spirit fathering a child, which is 100% against the procreation laws of nature. The spirit forces of Jesus were and still are the God of Caucasians in general, but not the God of Ethiopians. And this is why Ethiopians are always the dependent, servant, slaves, and captives in Caucasians' religion and civilization. Bible Interpretation and Explanation, Book 1, number 43. Here are some of the regular things Caesarion Jesus was doing as a young king in training. Caesarion was raised in Alexandria, Egypt, the capital of Hellenistic culture at the time, and had few Egyptians or Roman influence in his upbringing. Most of Caesarion's childhood was quite secure due to the relative stability of his mother's reign. In spite of his illegitimacy, Caesarion's role as Cleopatra's successor seemed to have gone unchallenged in Egypt. Like most princes of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Caesarion would have been trained in the arts of the rhetoric, oration, politics, and philosophy. Caesarion's personal tutor during his adolescence was a Greek scholar named Rhodon. Like little is known of Rhodon's career, a sharp contrast to the illustrious careers of Philostratus, Cleopatra's childhood tutor, and Nicholas of Damascus, who tutored Caesarion's siblings before becoming one of the most influential historians of the 1st century BCE. So Caesarion's own mother was yet another influence on his intellectual development, and that of his siblings. A skilled politician and orator, Cleopatra was credited with speaking 8 languages and authoring works on topics such as medicine and pharmacology. Ptolemy XV, Caesarion, Theos, Philometa, the father-loving, mother-loving god, better known by his unofficial nickname Caesarion, or Little Caesar in Greek, was the oldest son of Cleopatra VII and was the last Ptolemaic king of Egypt. Caesarion is usually assumed to have been the son of Julius Caesar, who had an intermittent affair with Cleopatra from their meeting in 47 BC until his death in 44 BC. Another thing, we the 9 orbs Ennead the Pesegit want to point out, which Flavius and the likes hid in plain sight, was the paternity issue between who was the father of Caesarion out of Julius Caesar or Mark Antony. I, Jutar, Jupiter, Amun, Re, Horus, Ma'at, the judge of all, was there and involved, and so was Sipu, the moon, Sin, as well. We inform Amanubi Rakapatar, Afro Unu, in the Bible interpretation and explanation booklets, which with more detail in 1967 and 1968. Question: who was the physical father and mother of Jesus, Esau Panthera, where he was killed, and what happened to his body? As stated in booklet 1 called Bible Interpretation and Explanation, the mother of Jesus was a black Phoenician queen of Egypt who had children but was unmarried, and this fact made it easier for Caucasians to state that Jesus had no human father. Yet the physical father of Jesus was the high-ranking Roman soldier, a general who was one of the Roman triumvirate. The mother of Jesus was Cleopatra, of well-known but notorious personage, and his father was Marcus Antonius, better known as Mark Antony. Antony was a warmonger. All Caucasians are personification of ghosts because they were bleached, ghostized by Leviathan using the ghost process when they were being extracted from the Phoenicians and East Indian peoples. Therefore, Mark Antony, being Caucasian, was ghost in person. Hence, when he impregnated Cleopatra, the ghost had overshadowed Mary, Cleopatra. St. Matthew, 1st chapter 18 and 20th verse. Cleopatra was neither Roman nor Greek like Caucasian history pretends. She was Phoenician and East Indian type woman. After Cleopatra began her liaison with Mark Antony, the Roman intruder of the East, Caesarion, appeared at Alexandria in 34 with the title King of Kings. So I just wanted to just repeat that again so you don't forget. Alright? Before Zane's Cotsbay Lechet Nupu proceeds, let him show you what history says that supports who Caesarion Jesus Pappy really was. Caesarion, doomed by his name, Too Many Caesars. May 16, 2016, written by Mary Harsh, a historian. Like Greek poet Constantine Cavafy, I have tried to imagine what Caesarion was like. Surely he possessed a healthy dose of charisma like his mesmerizing mother Cleopatra VII and his inspiring father, Gaius Julius Caesar. But then again, when I studied genetics in high school back in the 60s, I was told that nature tends to return to the norm rather than build successfully on the talents of one's parents. I was always puzzled by that, since researchers exploring the boundaries of eugenics always tried to manipulate the gene pool by selective breeding. I had never seen a sculptured portrait of Caesarion except the highly stylized relief of him as pharaoh alongside his mother, Queen Cleopatra VII, on the Temple of Dendera. Until I attended the Cleopatra, the Search for the Last Queen of Egypt exhibit at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania last month. There I saw an image of a handsome young man with hair peeking out from under the royal Nemez headdress, looking so melancholy as if he sensed his life would end soon without any of his dreams or ambitions fulfilled. Son of the avenging God, chosen by Ptah, dispenser of the justice of Ra, living power of Amun, proclaims the translation of Caesarion's Egyptian name. Sadly, Caesarion Ptolemy XV, known by his Greek subjects as Ptolemy Caesar, did not live to dispense justice or avenge the death of his father. He was executed by his father's adopted son Octavian, who would become the Roman Emperor Augustus. Of course, with literally the control of the Roman world at stake, Caesarion's actual paternity, needless to say, was much disputed by some ancient Romans, probably fueled by Octavian's robust propaganda machine. Dio Cassius, a Roman consul and historian writing in the 3rd century CE, claimed Cleopatra VII only pretended that Caesar was his father, while Nicholas of Damascus, a Greek historian who actually served as tutor to Antony and Cleopatra children but was later patronized by Augustus in his Life of Augustus, claimed that Caesar explicitly repudiated Caesarion in his will. Suetonius, born 69 AD, died 122 AD, a 2nd century historian patronized by the Roman Emperor Trajan, is carefully neutral in his Caesar 52. He noted that Caesarion was said to closely resemble Caesar, but also that Caesar's secretary G. Oppius wrote a book proving that Caesar could not be Caesarion's father. He also said that Caesar allowed Cleopatra VII to name the child after him, implying that he did not in fact acknowledge him as his, but then notes that Antony had declared to the Senate that Caesar did acknowledge the boy as his. Christ Bennett, Egyptian Royal Genealogy. It's now painful for a young man to look so much like his famous father but be denied by him. Of course, we must consider the real possibilities of political bias in these accounts. Even the later historians would have been influenced by the Romans' public perception that Augustus represented the gold standard for a Roman emperor. Even if Nicholas of Damascus was faithfully recording his observation of Caesar's will, it would not have been beyond the pale for Octavian to have discreetly amended the will to reinforce his position as unchallenged heir, especially if, as Plutarch reports, Caesarion successfully escaped to India and was at large elsewhere in the world for a time before being lured back to his death. Caesarion, who was said to be Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, was sent by his mother with much treasure into India by way of Ethiopia. There, Rhodon, another tutor like Theodorus, persuaded him to go back on the ground that Octavius Caesar invited him to take the kingdom. Plutarch, Life of Antony. Plutarch's account coincides with an oral tradition in India that the Cherus of Kerala traded extensively with Egypt, and the descendants of that royal family were told that letters were exchanged with Cleopatra. The Canadian historian George Woodcock says that Caesarion did indeed manage to escape with a large treasure and was granted asylum in Kerala. This is the country, Kerala. Lucy Hughes Hollett, in her book Cleopatra, History's Dreams Distortion, said that the queen herself intended to flee to India but fell ill and therefore ordered her son to leave without her. Whether or not he reached Kerala and survived is not known clearly, but the story assumes that he arrived in Kerala and received as an honored guest of the royal family. In fact, such was the respect and importance of this guest that there is said to have been a matrimonial alliance between the Egyptian prince and Chira princess Cleopatra and Charamam Perumal. Furthermore, Nicholas of Damascus reported ongoing communications between factions in India and Augustus at that time. This writer, Nicholas of Damascus, states that at Antioch near Daphne he met with ambassadors from the Indians who were sent to Augustus Caesar. It appeared from the letter that several persons were mentioned in it, but 3 only survived whom he says he saw. The rest had died chiefly in consequence of the length of the journey. The letter was written in Greek upon a skin. The importance of it was that Pausus was the writer that although he was sovereign of 600 kings, yet that he highly esteemed the friendship of Caesar, that he was willing to allow him a passage through his country in whatever part he pleased, and to assist him in any undertaking that was just. Were these letters part of Augustus' attempt to lure Caesarion back into his grasp? Archaeological evidence cannot settle the paternity issue without scholarly controversy either, not so much from a lack of physical remains attesting to Caesarion's birth date, but to the confusion over Egyptians' regnal year notations, as well as the state of flux in the official reading of the Roman calendar that was in the midst of being converted to the new Julian version. A stele in the Louvre appears to read Caesarion's birth, giving 23 Pani, year 5, as the birthday of the pharaoh Caesar. Assuming this dates the birth of Caesarion to 23 June 47, it places his conception in September 48, November, which is precisely the period when Cleopatra VII and Caesar were in closest contact in Alexandria under the siege of the forces of Achilles. At this time, it is very difficult to imagine how anyone else could be Caesarion's father. Chris Bennett, Egyptian Royal Genealogy. Bennett points out, though, that other scholars like J. Cappuccino, Passion et Politique chez les Caesars, 1958, page 37, argued that Antony had been smitten by the 14-year-old Cleopatra in 55 BC while stationed as a cavalry officer in Egypt and could have had an illicit affair with her, resulting in the birth of Caesarion. The second argument by JPVD Boston Historia 7, 1958, pages 80 and 86, is that Caesar's track record for conceiving children is poor, and therefore he was possibly sterile at this time of his life. Only one child is certainly acknowledged, his daughter Julia, and the assassin Marcus Brutus, who is sometimes claimed as his son, can be excluded on chronological grounds. This is in spite of his having had 3 wives and numerous affairs, but Arcime Historia 29, 1980, page 422, correctly points out that this means nothing. Low birth rates among the Roman aristocracy were a matter of official concern. Whether this was due to lead in the pipes of the increasing independence of aristocratic Roman women at that time, short-lived children were more common than not and rarely noticed, and adultery in high society is more amply documented than any consequences. Although Sierra makes many scandalous charges against his opponents, he never once accused an opponent of not being his father's son. In illustration of the point, Syme constructs suggestive arguments that Decimus Brutus and P. Cornelius Dolabella may have been unacknowledged sons of Caesar. Agao Julius Sabinus claimed descent from Caesar through his great-grandmother in 70 AD. Tacticus Historius 4, page 55. This has been generally disbelieved from Tacitus' day onward, though with Hein Historia 18, 1969, pages 181 and 202, I see no particular reason to doubt the story. Chris Bennett, Egyptian Royal Genealogy. Bennett also discusses numismatic evidence with dual dates representing periods of the joint rule of Cleopatra and Caesarion. Although all these speculations are interesting, the real bottom line is that the Romans at the time knew Cleopatra was making a valid claim, which made Octavian's resolution to the question of his legitimate inheritance of Caesar's fortune and power base so urgent. Colleen McCulley imagined a very poignant confrontation between Octavian and Caesarion in her book Antony and Cleopatra, a novel, Masters of Rome. Caesarion fearlessly approaches Octavian with a proposal to become a client king, but Octavian explains to the youth that he regretfully must take Caesarion's life. Caesarion's face reflects his confusion, disbelief, then resignation when he finally realizes his death is the consequence of looking so much like his famous father. This scenario was strictly fictitious, of course, but it was certainly plausible and perhaps painfully close to actual events that played out in those final days of the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt. So did Caesarion so closely resemble his father that he had to die to avoid future problems for Octavian? If we compare the suspected colossal head of Caesarion found in Alexandria harbor with one of the stylized portraits of the divine Julius found in Trajan's Forum, we can point to vague similarities in the width of the forehead and the angle of the cheekbones, but I think I see more similarity between Caesarion and marble head found in the Rhone River near the Arles, France in 2007. That is thought to be a portrait of the aging Caesar carved in 46 BC, just 2 years before his assassination on the Ides of March. Here's the picture that she was talking about. Head thought to be of Gaius Julius Caesar. And this is Caesarion's Ptolemy XV's stone. Definitely look none alike. This is a younger version of Julius Caesar. Caesar's hair has receded and his face is deeply lined, but this more natural-looking portrait appears to reflect a similar shape of the mouth and the same innate melancholia as I saw in the head of Caesarion recovered by French divers. When I think of Caesarion, I can't help but wonder what might have been. Like Alexander IV and Caesar held such promise, but as happens far too often in history, fortune doesn't just favor the bold, but the greedy and the ruthless. Also found a statue thought to be Cleopatra II or III, both of whom ruled Egypt during the mid-2nd century BC, to be quite breathtaking. Near the remains of a temple that Cleopatra passed every day, divers discovered a beautiful carved sculpture of a priest holding an Osiris canopus jar. The tender way the priest carries the Osiris canopus vase, resting it lightly on his cheek, evokes a love for the god and a desire to forever remain in his presence. Cleopatra, the search for the last queen of Egypt. Listen to sound right cosmic reason. This confusion of who fathered Hsitorical Jesus played out in the New Testament as Joseph, Flavius, and others wrote in Matthew. Remember, Joseph's real name is Joseph ben Matthias. Matthias is another way to spell Matthew. Remember this well. Now the birth of Christ was on this wise when, as his mother Mary was espoused to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Ghost. Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away privately. But while he thought on these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a dream, saying, Joseph, thou son of David, fear not to take unto thee Mary, thy wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Ghost, and she shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins. Now all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Behold, a virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is God with us. Then Joseph, being raised from the sleep, did as the angel of the Lord had bidden him, and took unto him his wife, and knew her not until she had brought forth her firstborn son, and he called his name Jesus. In this spooky version, shaking our orbs, Joseph is also Joseph Flavius Piso, who added himself in the story as well. Same way Shakespeare added his name in the book of Psalms chapter 46. Also gematria style, Joseph also represented Julius Caesar, and Marcus Antony represented the Holy Ghost, also called an angel of the Lord in Matthew 1:24 states, take a look. Joseph, which is Joseph in Hebrew, comes out to 70. Julius comes out to 70. AKA Joseph, who did not father Hsitorical, falsely called Jesus. Here you got the angel of the Lord, which is 85. Mark Antony the general is 85. Now that you all know that Matthias Matthew was pen pimping the history of what took place, that also means the genealogy of Jesus is wrong. This also goes for Hsitorial's genealogy chart. It's incorrect as well. So this is the genealogy chart in Matthew 1:2-16, and in Luke 3:23-38. The first thing Zane Kochve Lechet Nupu did was notice how many times Joseph Flavius Piso / Joseph ben Matthias entered his name in both genealogies at least 10 times. And when you look at it, you see here what you got. Let's look at this so y'all can see this. See, Joseph, right? Matthias is another way to say Matthew or Matthias. Matthias again. Look, Joseph is another way to say Joseph. See, Matata is another way to say Matthew. Joseph, see, Matat, Joseph again, and you got Mathan over here. All right. Number game plan. The first thing, Zane's Kochve, okay, we got to that. Secondly, Luke has 80 names listed, not including Jesus, which makes no sense if Joseph wasn't the father. Then adding Jesus to it is utter deception at its finest. Remember this well. Matthew gives 41 entries, not including Jesus. Remember, Dr. Lena Einhorn stated that Mr. Flavius Piso exaggerated numbers. This is true and factual. When you observe, Hsitorial's genealogy is 31 entries, which is 10 less than Matthew Flavius Matthew's version. Also, Julius wasn't his father. So you got Hsitorial over here, Julius Caesar right here, his mother right here. So they already numbered these. So if you go all the way to over here is 31. So both genealogies are incorrect. On purpose though. Listen to reason. Now that it's established who Jesus Caesarion really was, this means the timeline of when Caesarion died was a lie on both ends. Meaning he died at 33, which is true. Not 33 AD. Neither did he die at 17 either. He was 33. Let's do the math. He was born 47 BC and died 14 BCE equals 33 years. The same way the biblical history was so mysteriously missing years of Jesus, the same goes for the historical Caesarion. In reality, the Roman Catholic Church has always known what really happened, and so will you. Stay attuned. True myth, the peace, and wartime.